Hello, my dear students. So, welcome back to our lecture. So, this will be the chapter 10 and chapter 11, I think, or the module number 9. Okay, it composed of two chapters kasi. So, I want to share with you my PowerPoint presentation. Okay. Today we're going to discuss about the Philippine Revolution uh, under Aguinaldo's leadership. So the battleground was transferred from Manila to Cavite. And the governor at that time was General Camilo Polavieja, but he was uh, relieved as per his request by General Primo de Rivera on April 15, 1897. And after the death of the Supremo of the Katipunan, Andres Bonifacio, the two factions, okay, Magdiwang and Magdalo, um, in Cavite merged their forces to become one in the revolutionary government of President Emilio Aguinaldo. And so, with the former Katipuneros in various areas in Luzon, who dissolved their group and joined the new Philippine government placed in Cavite. Okay? So, the last stand of Aguinaldo's revolutionary government in Cavite. So when the rumors scattered regarding the conflict of the two factions, the Spanish already started to attack the various um, areas of Cavite. So on February 15, 1897, Spaniards reinforced their line to crush General Aguinaldo's forces. So when the Spaniards already penetrated in most areas of Cavite, Aguinaldo's group began to retreat into the mountains of Laguna, de Tayabas, and the others were in Bulacan. So on June 6, 1897, a certain Mamerto Alejandrino Natividad Jr. was named Lieutenant General for the Central Luzon. So the appointment was later approved by General Emilio Aguinaldo on June 18, and Natividad was the youngest general. He was only 26 at that time. So the General Natividad was commissioned by Aguinaldo to look for a place of retreat, and he found Biak na Bato located in uh, San Miguel de Payumo, Bulacan. So General Emilio Aguinaldo and his forces immediately evacuated Cavite in July 1897 and proceeded to Biak na Bato in San Miguel de Payumo, Bulacan. So the establishment of Biak na Bato government or Biak na Bato Republic. Okay. So after moving in San Miguel, Bulacan, General Emilio Aguinaldo established his headquarters um, in Biak na Bato. Okay, so the news immediately spread throughout the neighboring provinces, and the revolutionary forces were once again uh, in high morale and spirit. So General Mariano Nunez Llanera of Cabiao, Nueva Ecija declared his loyalty and support to Emilio Aguinaldo. And in July 1897, Emilio Aguinaldo established the what we called Republic of Biak na Bato and issued a proclamation stating the following demands. Okay. So what are those demands? Number one, expulsion of priors and the return of priors' land to the Filipinos. Number two is the representation of the Philippines in the Spanish Cortes. Number three is the freedom of the press and of the religion. Number four is about the abolition of the government's power to banish Filipinos. And equality, number five is equality for all before the law. So to formalize uh, the Biak na Bato government, they conducted another election. So wherein the following were elected as wherein the president is Emilio Aguinaldo, the vice president is Mariano Trias, the secretary is Antonio Montenegro, okay, treasurer is Baldomero Aguinaldo, and assistant treasurer is none other than Emilio Riego de Dios. So, uh, it was November 1 when the Biak na Bato Republic was inaugurated under the Biak na Bato Constitution. So, um, a constitution was drafted or written by Felix Ferrer and Isabelo Artacho. So this constitution of Biak na Bato again was written by Felix Ferrer and Isabelo Artacho. And this Biak na Bato constitution was based or patterned after the Cuban Constitution of 1895. So according to this constitution, a Supreme Council would be formed, and uh, and the following features were considered in the Constitution. What are those features of the Biak na Bato Constitution? Number one is establishment of the Supreme Council that will serve as the highest governing body of the Republic. Number two is human rights. Number three is freedom of religion. Number four is freedom of the press. And number five is the right to education. So as I said, no, this Biak na Bato Republic, the council where in the president is Emilio Aguinaldo, the vice president again is Mariano Trias, Secretary of Foreign Affairs Antonio Montenegro, Secretary of Interior Isabel Artache, and Secretary of War is Emiliano Riego de Dios. Okay. So, Spanish uh, the Spanish government really wanted to finish the war in the Philippines, no, through their governor, uh, General Primo de Rivera, by eradicating General Emilio Aguinaldo and his remaining revolutionary forces. But the governor, General, reversed his approach. Instead of an attack, okay, he introduced a peace talk and to assist fire um, to General Emilio Aguinaldo and group through Pedro Paterno as their negotiator, no? Wherein Pedro Paterno was tagged as the political balimbing, okay? So, wherein this Pedro Paterno was tagged again as the Filipino political balimbing during that time. Pedro Paterno is a Spanish Filipino, no, that he became the mediator between the revolutionaries and the Spanish authorities. Okay? So, Pedro Paterno tried to convince General Emilio Aguinaldo to enter into an agreement, okay, um, with Governor General Primo de Rivera in the name of peace. So initially, the General Emilio Aguinaldo declined the offer, but after the series of meetings, perhaps General Emilio Aguinaldo and his group realized that they did not have any more strength and force to fight the Spaniards. So he agreed to enter in the peace agreement or pact. That through him there was an agreement drawn with three documents. No, the first document was signed on November 18, 1897. The second document was signed on December 14, 1897, and on December 15, the third document was signed. Okay, so what is the provisions of the what is the Pact of Biak na Bato? So when General Emilio Aguinaldo finally agreed to enter into a pact or agreement, both parties submitted their will to be accomplished as a content of the pact. So on December 14, 1897, they officially drafted the agreement between the Spanish government through Governor General Fernando Primo de Rivera and the Biak na Bato Republic by Emilio Aguinaldo. So to execute the pact, no, General Emilio Aguinaldo with his men was given an amnesty and monetary guarantee by the Spanish colonial government. So according to Teodoro Agoncillo, the pact was made into three documents, and in relation to the writings of Emilio Aguinaldo in 1899, the condition stated as the Pact of Biak na Bato were as follows. Okay? What are those? Number one, Emilio Aguinaldo and the other rebels will leave the uh, Philippines voluntarily. Number two, the rebels would surrender their arms to Spanish authorities. Number three, Spain should pay or would pay a total indemnity of 900,000 for non-combatants and 800,000 Mexican pesos for the rebels payable as follows. Okay, first, the Spaniards will give Aguinaldo uh, the 400,000, and as they left the country, so the another 200,000 to be given after majority of the arms were surrendered, and another 200,000 will be given after to be given after all hostilities or cease and general amnesty was proclaimed. So that is those are the provisions of the Pact of Biak na Bato. So, um, as PAC, um, uh, the PAC document was signed in the house of Pablo Texon in San Miguel, Bulacan. So he was the Brigadier General in the Brigada del Pilar, no, of General Gregorio del Pilar during the revolution. So some of the revolutionaries like General Miguel Malvar and General Mamerto Alejandrino Natividad Jr. was disagreed, no, to the pact. Okay, and while they are um, traveling to Hong Kong for an excel, Aguinaldo requested that uh, the governor to requested de Rivera to send his two Spanish officers to their camp and to be hostage, to be assured that Aguinaldo's team will be surely safe during the exile. So Spanish officers will only be released if there will be a telegraph from Aguinaldo that they have safely arrived in Hong Kong. So referring to the study made by Ronald Kenneth Bell on April 8, 1974 from San Miguel, Bulacan, General Emilio Aguinaldo and his troop traveled to Suwal, Pangasinan on the Lingayen Gulf. Along the way, sadness was at their heart because they felt a loser. But when they saw their kababayan or the Filipinos as well as Spaniards lined along the road of Suwal, waving their hands to them, okay, they felt relief and thankfulness because they were greeted as a hero, as even some Spanish did the same. So from Lingayen Gulf, they boarded the steamer Uranus for Hong Kong on December 27, 1897. Before the departure of the steamer Uranus, General Emilio Aguinaldo sent a message for Governor General Primo de Rivera. Okay. So Emilio Aguinaldo left for Hong Kong and continued the revolutionary government, and he by organizing the so-called Hong Kong Junta. So the next topic we have is the American infiltration in the Philippines. Okay, that's under module number 9. Excuse me. So those who are studying Philippine history questions about how and why Americans became here in the Philippines. Okay, so uh, where in their conflict to Spain was in Cuba, but later the time they entered the Philippines or the country, they focus more on their campaign here in the Philippines instead of Cuba. So after the incident that happened in Havana, Cuba Harbor. Okay. Um, the explosion of their warship USSR Maine. Okay, that caused the death of their officers and crews on board. America immediately suspected that the Spanish government, because beforehand, okay, the two countries already had their Cold War, because America's interest also to Cuba, which was a colony that time of Spain. So, due to that explosion on April 21, 1898, okay, um, so due to that explosion on April 20, 1898, the United States declared war against Spain. The causes of their conflict were many, but according to American government, the immediate one was America's support of Cuba's ongoing struggle against Spanish rule. So it was the first overseas war fought by United States using their steel ships that brought um, superiority to the name of America in their naval forces in the world at that time. So again, the question is how the Philippines got into this conflict. So the American-Spanish War was because of Cuba. So the Philippines was silent, no, after the Pact of Biak na Bato because all of uh, uh, all of the though revolutionary leaders of the Philippines led by General Emilio Aguinaldo were exiled in Hong Kong. But even though they went into silence, according to Aguinaldo, the fight still continued. So they reestablished their group and they called themselves as the Hong Kong Junta, as I said earlier. They reinforce themselves and look for the proper timing to come back here in the Philippines to once again fight for the Philippine independence. So what is Hong Kong Junta is the uh, it was established by Emilio Aguinaldo. Okay, wherein they asked some of the members of the revolutionaries to go to the different parts of the world to study the different constitution, like the Constitution of America, the Constitution of Australia, Japan, no, and Hong Kong, of course. The Hong Kong junta played a crucial role in the revolution. Even though they were exiled, their campaign of war against Spain was no longer by armed struggle as what they usually did in the Philippines. So they temporarily shifted to diplomatic means and by propaganda, but with the same objective to achieve the Philippine independence. So the junta was the aftermath of the signing of the Pact of Biak na Bato in Bulacan. So not all members of the established Biak na Bato government went to exile. So they choose to stay in the Philippines because there were members who disagreed in the signing of the pact. So perhaps because of the distance, no, from Philippines to Hong Kong and the means of communication to misunderstanding and discontentment arose that made several changes in their membership due to resignation of some of their members here in the Philippines and also in Hong Kong. Okay. So on December 2, 1898, General Emilio Aguinaldo deposited a 400,000 Mexican peso in Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation under his name and company. And after 2 days, 2 days later, he withdrew the half of the money and deposited it with the Chartered Bank of India, Australia, and China. So during the course of his transaction, Aguinaldo discovered that the second and third payment, each of 200,000, could be negotiated very profitably in the Crown Colony. So at an interest rate of 8.5%. Therefore, you urged to his cousin Baldomero Aguinaldo to who was left behind in Biak na Bato to remit the draft without delay. So their money in the bank was increased by 18,582. No, so a strict budget was established for the exiles and a frugal existence of enforced was enforced by Aguinaldo. So every expense had to be reported to Aguinaldo, who meticulously noted the sums of his account book. The most items the most trivial items are a pair of shoes, a new coat had to be approved by the leader. So for some of the men was a far cry from what they expected as exiles in Hong Kong. So they were in a strange land where a foreign language was spoken. They had a little to do except wait and hope for the chance to return in their homeland. So internal quarreling is a sign of their discontent soon developed. So General Emilio Aguinaldo had misinterpreted the intent of the charter or the character of men he had left behind. So their trust in him and the revolutionary cause was not as lasting as he had thought. So that this satisfaction manifested itself 2 days after Aguinaldo's departure. So led by Isabel Artacho, the rebels of Biak na Bato passed a resolution which was defied the departed leaders. Okay? So this attitude was the result of being left behind with no money, while the less meritorious were enjoying the use of indemnity in Hong Kong. So the authors of the resolution felt it impossible to carry on without alleviating their own financial plight. So the resolution proposed, okay, that the second and the third installment totaling of 400,000 Mexican peso be distributed to the most needy insurgents. So Pasiano Rizal, respected insurgent leader, was selected to approach the Spaniards with the new proposal. Since the surrendering of rebels and arms was controlled by these men, so Primo de Rivera readily agreed to their petition. So the second installment was quickly, if not equitably, divided among the leaders left at Biak na Bato. So Pedro Paterno informed Aguinaldo, okay, of the resolution on December 19 or the resolution of December 29 and of the subsequent Spanish payment to the rebels at Biak na Bato for Aguinaldo. The situation was fast deteriorating. So there was discontent and division among the exiles in Hong Kong and open defiance of his leadership in the Philippines. So um, unless countermeasures were taken, the discontent in Hong Kong could um, could also turn to defiance, no, with clever timing and brilliant utilization of information received from the Philippines. So Aguinaldo resisted the potential threat to his leadership and to the unity of the junta. So on February 14, 1898, Aguinaldo called for a meeting of all the exiles in Hong Kong. So they met at the Green Mount House, a sort of headquarters that was used as gathering place for discussion or casual talks. No, he relayed to the assemblage Paterno's message describing the resolution of December 29. So Aguinaldo then read the letter from Lieutenant Colonel Miguel Primo de Rivera, the nephew of the Governor General, stating that the Spanish had no intention of making the third payment as long as there was any revolt in the Philippines and the society of the Katipunan was not dissolved. So the letter also ruined hopes to the return of the Philippines by any of the exiles. So Aguinaldo then announced that Artacho was resigning as Secretary of the Interior and the Director of Commerce was demanding reimbursement of 508.75 Mexican peso for miscellaneous expenses. So the Hong Kong exiles reacted just as Aguinaldo would have wished. So they believed that the Spaniards and Artacho's group were acting in bad faith. The assemblage agreed to reject the Biak na Bato Agreement on December 19, 1897 and authorized Aguinaldo to take charge of the money, spending only the interest for living expenses. While they approved Artacho's resignation, they disapproved his demand for reimbursement. So as a final act, the officials of the provisional government formed at Biak na Bato were replaced by individuals selected from the membership of the exiled group. So the said meeting represented the first action of the Hong Kong junta that the reins of the provisional you call this, the reins of the provisional government were officially, if not actually, assumed by the rebels in Hong Kong. So the junta was no longer a meaningless group of exiles awaiting the outcome of a bug and weak agreement, but concentration of serious Filipino leaders with quite a large sum of money. So the exiled Filipino leadership, despite their initial displays of conciliation and loyalty to Spain, they had uh, uh, um, every intention of continuing the revolt while the junta was established itself to Hong Kong. Okay, events in the Philippines were not going smoothly for the Spanish. So they were bothered by continued clashes with the Filipinos, but as these outbreaks were scattered and unorganized, they were initially attributed to uh, Lisanes or the bandits. So the junta supported the leadership of Aguinaldo over that of the unhappy leaders left behind in the Philippines who maneuvered to obtain the second payment of indemnification from the colonial government. So Aguinaldo and other revolutionists decided to cancel the pact owing to the violations committed by the Spanish government against the terms of the agreement through the manifesto dated on April 1898. So, how America entered the Philippines? Ang haba ng kwento natin, no? So how America entered the Philippines? So from Hong Kong, okay, from Hong Kong, General Emilio Aguinaldo sailed uh, to Singapore for an important meeting with his old friend, which is none other than Mr. Howard W. Gray, an Englishman who decided or resided also in the Philippines for 15 years before he moved to Singapore. So Aguinaldo was accompanied by Colonel Gregorio del Pilar and a certain Mr. J. Leiba. The purpose of their visit was to consult up to his friend the status of the Philippines and then as exiled in Hong Kong. So he would also take the opportunity to gather news about the possibilities of the war between America and Spain. And the idea of that of what if, okay, they would support and cooperate with America to fight Spain. Should America recognize the Philippine independence after? So Mr. Bray was the one who introduced General Emilio Aguinaldo to the American Consul General in Singapore, which is Spencer Pratt. Okay, so the consul general was also worried about the condition of the Philippines. So after a few days, Mr. Bray arranged for an interview between the two gentlemen, Mr. Pratt and General Aguinaldo. So Mr. Bray acted as interpreter of General Aguinaldo because General Aguinaldo was that time was having difficulty understanding the and speaking English. So he was Tagalog and also Spanish speaking. So General Emilio Aguinaldo narrated their story and the status of the Philippines under the Spaniards. So from the conversation with the American Consul General, Aguinaldo learned that the attack of America would conduct in the Philippines and he took that opportunity to once again engage in the armed struggle against Spain in the Philippines. So Aguinaldo and his men would help in maintaining the discipline of the Filipino people once they landed in the Philippine soil. So he also reiterated his will to establish a government for the Philippines with liberal principles and he would be willing to accept same terms as what they planned for Cuba. So after listening to narration and proposal of General Aguinaldo, Mr. Pratt agreed, okay? Mr. Pratt agreed with the general's view on the discussion. So the Consul General put himself to a telegraph to send a communication to Commodore George Dewey of the American Asiatic Naval Squadron stationed at that time near China and ready to proceed in Manila Bay to attack the Spanish Armada or fleet. So in the response of Commodore Dewey, he immediately requested General Emilio Aguinaldo to leave Singapore and go back to Hong Kong for Manila. Okay. So what is what we call battle in uh, Manila Bay? So on April 30, Dewey's American Asiatic Squadron slipped, okay, by the defensive guns of Corregidor Island and into Manila Bay. So after dawn, they when they located the Spanish fleet, uh, a group of out of date warship anchored off the Cavite Naval Station. So mostly the ship of the Spanish fleet were made of wood. So the U.S. fleet is in comparison was well armed and well staffed largely due to the effort of the energetic Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Theodore Roosevelt, who had also selected Dewey for that command of the Asiatic Squadron. So at around 5:40 a.m. on May 1, 1898, Dewey turned um, to the captain of his flagship, and no, yung flagship niya is the what we call Olympia, and 2 hours later, the Spanish fleet was destroyed, and Dewey ordered the pause in the fighting. So that the surviving Spanish vessels trapped in the little harbor in Cavite. So um, refused to surrender, and late that morning fighting resumed. So early that afternoon, a signal was sent from the gunboat USS Petrel to Davis flagship announcing that the enemy has surrendered. So it was known as the famous Battle of Manila Bay. So where the Spanish losses estimated at more than 370 troops and all of their warship known as Armada, while American casualties were fewer than 10. So the victory of in Manila Bay um, cleared the way for the U.S. occupation of Manila in August and the eventual transfer of the Philippines from Spanish to American control. So, um, the return of Emilio Aguinaldo. So, after the Battle of Manila Bay, American President William McKinley uh, decided to seize, okay, to seize Manila from Spanish colonizer of the Philippines. So he ordered assembly of the um, eight corps of the American Army, consisting of almost 11,000 soldiers under the command of Major General Wesley Merritt, okay, and waiting for their deployment. So while waiting for the American 8th Corps, okay, Commodore Dewey dispatched one of his ship, the USRC McCulloch, cutter to Hong Kong to fetch and transport back the group of General Emilio Aguinaldo. So they arrived in the Philippines on May 19, 1898, wherein General Emilio Aguinaldo and some of his men met with Commodore Dewey to talk about how they will resume their revolutionary activities synchronized with the American forces. So So after the meeting on May 24, 1890, General Emilio Aguinaldo instantly issued a proclamation in which he assumed command of all Philippine forces and announced, okay, his intention to establish a dictatorial government with himself as a dictator. So the form of government that he established when he come back, no, in the Philippines, he established the what we call dictatorial government, wherein when the news quickly scattered about the return of the Filipino revolutionary leaders with the Americans on their side, Filipinos serving as enlisted men deserted local Spanish army units to join Aguinaldo's command, and the Philippine Revolution against Spain resumed. So later, places such as Imus, okay, Bacoor, Parañaque, Las Piñas, Morong, no, Macabebe, and San Fernando, as well as some inter-provinces such as Laguna, Batangas, Cavite, Bulacan, no, Nueva Ecija, Bataan, Tayabas, which is now Quezon, and the Camarines Norte or Camarines provinces, the Norte and Sur, were liberated by the Filipinos, and the port of Dalahican in Cavite was secured. So So by the end of May, the United States Department of the Navy had um, ordered Dewey, no, the newly promoted to admiral, to distance himself from Aguinaldo in case he made untoward commitments to the Philippine forces. So the war with Spain still was going on, and the future of the Philippines remained uncertain. So the war with Spain was uh, or the immediate objective was to capture Manila, and it was thought best to do that without the assistance of the revolutionaries. Okay. So, um, on June 30, 1898, okay, as expected, the Spanish contingent America, uh, the second division of the 8th Corps of American Army arrived with their commander, Brigadier General Thomas MacArthur Anderson. So he sent a letter to General Emilio Aguinaldo requesting their cooperation with the military operations they would conduct against the Spanish forces. So General Aguinaldo responded to the letter, but the content was only to thank General Anderson for the letter and for their arrival, but did not comment anything about the military operation. So on July 17, another American contingent came in the Philippines. So the 2nd Brigade of the 8th Division under the command of Brigadier General Francis Green. And on July 25, Major General Wesley Merritt finally arrived with his staff. Merritt was the commander-in-chief of the Philippine expedition. So in the eyes of the Filipinos, the relationship with the United States was that of two nations joined in a common um, struggle against Spain. So as allies, the Filipinos provided American forces with valuable intelligence like the Spanish fleet, where old ships made of wood, no torpedoes. What they used was still a cannonball, and Aguinaldo's 12,000 troops kept slightly larger compared to Spanish forces battled up inside Intramuros, Manila, until American troop reinforcement could arrive from San Francisco in the late June. So General Emilio Aguinaldo started to feel unhappy. So the United States would not commit a statement in writing to support the for Philippine independence. So the Spanish cause was hopeless. But General Emilio Fermin Jaudens, no, um, the last governor in the Philippines, had to plan a way to save the honor of his country. So the Spanish strategies for restoration uh, of their pace. Okay, so Governor General Basil Agustin organized the what we call Philippine Militia. Philippine Militia is actually a military, um, an armed group created to help the Spanish army to protect the interests and the welfare of the people. And he also formed the what we call commission, which was responsible for persuading Filipino revolutionary to renew their loyalty to Spanish government. So wherein there is a consultative assembly or consultative assembleya. So this consultative assembly or consultative assembleya served as one of the advisors of the governor general in things that were substantial to government functions and administrative decisions, wherein the members were Pedro Paterno, Cayetano Arellano, Trinidad Pablo de la Pera, Isaac Fernando Rios, and Maximo Paterno, and Jose Losada, and Bonifacio Arevalo. So, how Spain save his space? Sabi nga natin, no, how is Spain save his space? General Jaudens tried, no, to negotiate through the British and Belgian diplomatic mediator. This is a secret agreement, okay? It is a secret agreement was made between General Jaudens and American military commanders in the early of August 1898. So, Spanish had feared of the Philippine Revolutionary that even if they surrendered, they felt that they still would be massacred by the angry Filipinos. So the Spanish and the American forces both agreed to put up a show or of fight, and um, and on the arranged signal, Spain would surrender. In this way, the Governor General would be spared the embarrassment of giving up without a fight. So, and both sides would be spared casualties. So, um, in our history, actually, it was the what we called mock battle in Manila Bay, or the mock battle in Manila. So it was the stage on August 13, 1898. The attackers rushed in, and by the afternoon, the United States flag was flying over Intramuros, wherein it is the ancient walled city that had been the seat of Spanish power for 333 years. So at the beginning of the war, Americans and Filipinos had been allies against Spain in all but name. So now Spanish and American were in the partnership that excluded the Filipino revolutionaries. Okay. So fighting between Americans and Filipino troops almost broke out as the former moved in to remove the ultimate from strategic positions around Manila on the eve of the attack. So Aguinaldo was told frankly by the American commander that his army could not participate and would be fired upon if it's cross, no, if they cross into the city. So the revolutionary were angry and at being denied victorious to entry into their own capital. But Aguinaldo bid his time. So the Filipino Revolutionary and the American Army relationship continued to deteriorate. However, it became clear to Filipinos that the Americans were in the island to stay. So there was a treaty signed by the what we call is Spanish and American treaty, yung tinatawag nating Treaty of Paris. It is the treaty that formally ended the Spanish-American War. So it was the signed by representative from Spain and the United States on December 10, 1898. So what are the provisions of this Treaty of Paris? Okay. So number one is the cession of the Philippines to the United States. Number two, since Spain governed the Philippines for more than 333 years or 300 years, so the United States must pay 20 million US dollars, no, for the improvements of the former made in the colony. So the session number three is the cession of Guam and Puerto Rico to the United States. Number four is withdrawal of Spanish sovereignty from Cuba. Number five is determination by Congress of the seat of the civil and the political rights of the inhabitants of the ceded territories. So that would be our lecture for the whole semester, for the whole midterm. So wait for the announcement for the schedule of your quiz and for the schedule of your midterm exam. So I hope you learned something and you got something from me. Thank you again, and I do not forget to subscribe on my YouTube channel. By the way, shout out nga pala dun sa mga students ko from BSBA 1A, BSBA 1B, BSBA 1C, BSBA 1D, and BSBA 1E, and BSBA 1M. And also, shout out tayo sa mga estudyante ko from CTE 1A, CTE 1B, and CTE 1D. Okay. Thank you again and have a nice day. Bye-bye!